I'm Rob,
And I'm Nate.
and welcome back to Nate Tricks Rob into watching another Billy Wilder film.
Yes, it is week 4 of Sherlock Holmes month, or week 5 of Billy Wilder month, as we watch the 1970 Billy Wilder directed film, The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes. So, you come
Now,
into this...
let me just say, I am not complaining, as while I joke
Okay.
about it, I am not complaining about watching another Billy Wilder film. They've all been enjoyable, including this one, so...
Indeed.
Yeah.
So you came into this knowing the title, and that's
Yes.
Billy Wilder, and
At
that's
this
about
point, when you are picking, if I don't already know very much about it, I'm intentionally trying to come into it pretty well blind.
it. Probably wise.
There were several times I considered pulling it up on IMDb, but it probably wouldn't have been very effective because I kept screwing up the name anyway. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So this film, as mentioned, is directed by Billy Wilder. It's co-written by him and his writing partner at the time, I.A.L. Diamond. The film came out in 1970. It is shot in England and Scotland, which is where it is set. It is a revisionist take on Sherlock Holmes, not unlike, in a number of ways, our selection last week, the 7% Solution. When casting this film, one of the actors that Billy Wilder considered for the role was Nicole Williamson, who went on to play Sherlock Holmes in the 7% Solution.
Yeah.
Also considered was Peter O'Toole, which would have been interesting.
Yeah.
And not really considered by Wilder, but who had sought Wilder out asking for the role, was Rex Harrison.
Remind me what
My
Rex
Fair
Harrison's
Lady.
been in. Oh, okay.
Dr. Dolittle.
Yeah.
But Wilder didn't think he was right for what he wanted to go for in this film. The actor who plays our Sherlock Holmes, Robert Stevens, is really good in it, as is the actor who plays our Dr. Watson, Colin Blakely. Neither of them big stars.
Gonna look at both of them and see.
Yeah, there was... I glanced at it, and there was very little that I knew
Colin
them
Blakely
from.
was in The Murder on the Orient Express,
Yeah,
but
he
as a kind of a bit part.
Yeah, he's in A Man for All Seasons, which was an Oscar winner.
Robert Stevens.
Was in Cleopatra, the 1968 Romeo and Juliet.
And a Henry V. So very British actor.
Yeah, very appropriate for the film. He has the right look, he has the right bearing, as does our Watson.
Did Robert Stevenson's appearance remind you of other Sherlock Holmes?
Well, he's almost like a picture book Sherlock Holmes. I had mentioned last week that I thought Nicole Williamson was kind of like the iconic Sherlock Holmes, but this guy may be even more iconic.
He reminded me
bearing.
actually a little bit of Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah, and a little bit of Basil Rathbone too.
More the Benedict Cumberbatch, but yeah.
Yeah. So the plot of this film is, well, we should probably talk a little bit about kind of where this film came from, and the title, Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, indicates where Wilder and Diamond were kind of originally wanting to concentrate the storyline on, which is not necessarily the mystery element, but more exploring elements of the character that hadn't been plumbed very much up until that time. Wilder would go on to say he regretted not being more overt in what he wanted to make the film about, which is about Holmes as a repressed homosexual, which is an element that comes up in the film, though they don't completely commit to it.
And almost is
and
discarded.
is dismissed, yeah. And so Wilder thought he should have stuck to his guns more and made that part of the thing. And part of the joke was going to be that Holmes was gay and Watson was not, and Watson was shocked to find out that Holmes was. And they have a variation of that in this film. There's really kind of two principal storylines, but this film was originally supposed to have been a great deal longer, probably closer to 2.5 hours, maybe longer. And some of the sequences were shot. In fact, most of them were shot, but not added. And some of them are available as special features in the DVD, but none of them are complete. Some of them are audio survives, and then there's some, like, production stills. And
we should have watched a few of those.
Some of them are just the footage, but the audio doesn't exist anymore. So there was going to be more to the opening. So the framing device of the story is that 20 years after Dr. Watson dies in 1920, per his will...
Was it 20 or 50?
50, yeah, I'm sorry, 50 years. So he dies in 1920, and then in 1970, according to his will, they removed this medical bag that's been in storage at a bank, and it contains various knickknacks associated with Holmes, as well as the manuscript for several stories that he chose not to publish or make public until basically all the principal participants would have been dead, because they reflected a personal nature, or they were sensitive for security and other reasons. So the original film was to have Holmes or Watson's heir, who was a Canadian veterinarian, retrieve the documentation in 1970, and then there was going to be more of a prologue to the 19th century portion of the film, more of an epilogue at the end of the film, and 3 additional vignettes, including a flashback to Sherlock Holmes' college days that would deal with his difficult relations with women, which I think is hinted at a little bit when he tells the story about his fiancée, which was kind of a new construction, that he had been married, but his fiancée, who's the daughter of his violin instructor, had gotten influenza and passed away like a day before
the night before their wedding. Yeah,
which led only caused Holmes to be hold stronger his view that women are unreliable.
Yes,
and not to be trusted. Died the day before the wedding
in a fairly comedic fashion. Well, it comes across as comedic, though.
Kind
Holmes
of melancholy.
Doesn't really mean it comedically.
Yeah.
So,
and then the 2 other vignettes was one, the case of the upside down room, and the case of I forget the honeymoon murder, which would have been on a train, and they find a corpse, which is a naked woman who is shown quite a lot in the stills that survive. The joke was that the whole time they're talking, there is a naked woman in the middle of the screen, which for a 1970 release, they eventually chickened out on. But yeah, it's a clever enough film. It's actually surprisingly well structured. There's certain things in it that don't really come back until later in the film, including a throwaway line at the beginning about some missing dwarfs that turned out to be a relevant plot point,
which I caught fairly quickly. I don't know the first time you saw that, did you catch that plot line as quickly?
I don't know if I did.
Been long enough since you saw it.
Yeah, I think I've seen this 2 or 3 times in addition to tonight. And it's probably been 8+ years since I saw it last.
Fun. Now, my first comment to you, as this movie neared its end, was that this was different pacing for Billy Wilder. I have grown somewhat accustomed to the much higher tempo Billy Wilder films. You know, kind of like Witness for the Prosecution, 1, 2, 3, Avante.
Yeah. It's a slow build. It's not in a hurry.
It's not meant as a criticism.
Yeah.
Just I know it was noticeable. You know, knowing that this was, in fact, if I had not known this was Billy Wilder going into it, I wouldn't have picked it out as Billy Wilder because of the difference in pacing.
It is pretty leisurely paced for a Billy Wilder film, and I think you get some more of that in some of his later films. I recall Fedora as being another kind of languidly paced film, which was his penultimate movie. Yeah, I kind of liked the pacing, and I liked the structure. I wish they had committed more to the vignettes.
Yeah.
I think that, and had broken up the primary narrative, because you only really get the vignette with the opera, or the ballet at the beginning, where Holmes and Watson get the invitation.
But they weave that into the rest of the plot.
They do weave that in.
Well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, it almost seemed like an outlier, but they wove it in often enough throughout the remainder of the film that it works quite well.
Mm-hmm. But the joke there is that there's this prima Russian ballerina who is getting ready to retire, and she decides she wants to devote the rest of her life to raising her child, but she has to have the child, and she wants to have the child with one of the great minds of the world. And after things didn't work out with Tolstoy, Tchaikovsky, and Nietzsche, they settled on Sherlock Holmes. Holmes is not interested in relations with this woman. There's a scene in which she says, her translator says, "Do you not find her attractive?" To which I ask you, do you not find her attractive? The Russian ballerina.
Oh, she was okay.
Yeah. She's kind of severe looking face, and which I think was kind of the joke.
Which is appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he doesn't want to procreate with the miss, and so he basically tells them he's gay with Watson.
Yeah.
And when Watson finds out, he's quite upset because he was having a jolly good time dancing with the ballerinas at the after party.
Yes.
Until the male ballet dancers just hear the word and
become
very interested in proximity to Watson. It's an amusing enough scene.
Oh yeah, that's a fun scene. That was a very fun scene, and it was the pacing I would have expected from a Billy Wilder film.
Yeah, it gives you the impression early on that it is going to be more episodic.
Yeah.
But then 70% of the film is devoted to the principal storyline, which involves a woman played by the still living French actress Genevieve Page.
Very attractive.
Very attractive, who shows up, is brought to Holmes and Watson's residence because she had their address in some of her paperwork that survived her. She was pulled out of the water, and she has amnesia, and they have to supposedly. And they have to kind of figure out who she is, and she says, I am from Belgium, and my husband is an engineer, and he went to England, and he hasn't returned my letters for 3 weeks, and I need to find out what happened to him. And apparently someone tried to kill her for it, so there's something mysterious that they need to investigate. I was looking kind of at my watch, and it's about an hour in before they get to real sleuthing in this film.
I actually really enjoyed that build-up, even that scene with the letter and things of that nature.
That is the scene I'm talking about. That to me is when they're out and about, and they're all three of them together, Holmes, Watson, and Gabrielle, Genevieve Page's character, are out looking for her husband. And they go to the address that she's been sending the letters to, which is an abandoned store. And they break in there to wait to see who retrieves the letter, because they sent a letter to themselves as bait.
It sent a letter addressed to him. But it was blank.
Blank, yeah.
Yeah.
And that scene I just really love. And I think part of it is because after all this build-up, they're finally out capering. Finally out on an adventure. And it's a good scene, but I think the fact that it took so long to get there makes it an even better scene than it would have otherwise been.
Well, it maintains a sense of tension all the way through that point in the film. You're wondering, where is this going, what's happening, and as soon as you see the canaries, I was like, oh, this is going to go, a particular type of direction. They're not going to go too many places with canaries.
With canaries, yeah.
And they then proceed to follow some clues and end up going to they get called in to meet Mycroft, who's played by Christopher Lee, who I let me rephrase that, a very young Christopher Lee, who I did not recognize through the duration of the film, and it was only when I pulled up the IMDb that I realized it was Christopher Lee. I knew he was very familiar, Christopher Lee's voice is, but it's been long enough since I've seen Christopher Lee film that it didn't pop out immediately to me. Which also happened to me, I believe it was with isn't he in the Hammer film Mummy?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the same thing happened to me in that film. I was like, wait a minute.
If you're trying to guess whether or not he was in a Hammer film, he probably was.
Yeah.
He did an awful lot of Hammer films.
Yeah.
And he also played Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
One time. He was one of the few actors to play both Mycroft and Sherlock Holmes. And he played Sherlock Holmes in a 1962 film, which I am pretty sure would have been made for Hammer, which I think was essentially under contract with at the time, called Sherlock Holmes and the Deadly Necklace.
Yeah.
Which I kind of want to see.
Well, but they get called to meet with Mycroft.
Because of the letter.
Yes.
So when they go to pick up the letter, they find that the residence, the address, is a shop that has a bunch of canaries in it, even though it's closed. And there's a lady in a wheelchair that comes periodically to feed the canaries and to pick up the mail. And eventually, when she leaves the letter for some reason, and it's
on top of the birdcage.
The letter is addressed to Sherlock Holmes from Mycroft, because Mycroft knows what's going on, and it says, "Come meet me at the Diogenes Club." They go to meet him, and he says, "Stay away from this one, Sherlock." And of course, that's an invitation for Sherlock to continue the investigation.
Who picks up enough clues from an overheard conversation with a porter to figure out where they need to go to Scotland.
I was going to mention very briefly, since you mentioned a porter, this little kind of extra piece of business when they enter the Diogenes Club, and the reception guy is missing his right arm. It's not mentioned. One assumes that a lot of the people at this club or employed by this club would be ex-military. But I just like that it's there with no explanation. It just kind of enriches the environment. And another thing that enriches this, and what I noticed in one of the reviews, is Baker Street. Baker Street is a beautiful long set.
Yeah.
And it's very elaborate, and it's very well maintained in terms of the carriages and the people walking around. It's fun to see.
Because this was filmed at a studio, it makes me wonder what else they were shooting on that street.
Yeah.
Because they didn't build that just for this.
No, that's Pinewood, and it's what's a Victorian British street, and it would not surprise me, I don't know this for sure, if this would have been in another film to come out in 1970, Scrooge.
Yeah.
Which is a musical version of A Christmas Carol with Albert Finney.
Well, I think that you're probably right, because there is, later on, there's the shot with the same scene redecorated and with the snow on it. I don't know if you caught it was the
I did
same
cut
street.
that, yeah.
But yeah.
So that could very well be related.
Yeah. But yeah, so they proceed to Scotland, where they make a reference to a line that came in very early in the film about 6 midget brothers, acrobat midget brothers.
This
And
was
it
a case that Holmes turned down
Yeah,
to
because
find
the
these
guy
missing
was too
acrobats.
cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how he's like, well, I already know what happened. Is the guy only offered to pay me £5. That's less than a pound a midget. So obviously he's a cheapskate, and that the acrobats left to join a more profitable circus.
Which was very entertaining, and it was entertaining.
And it
to
seemed
have
like
that
a
come
throwaway
back.
line, and
Yeah.
to loop it around. Yeah.
Yeah. But the midgets, 2 of them have been killed, along with Mr. Valladon,
Genevieve Page's husband.
and they're being buried, and they observe them being buried, and they trace them back to a castle, and they take lodgings under assumed names. Well, their whole trip has been done under assumed names. And
With Watson playing the valet,
Yep.
and Holmes and Genevieve being a
Mr.
couple.
and Mrs. Ashdown.
Yes.
Yeah. And they attempt to continue to investigate this. Watson is convinced that he has seen the Loch Ness Monster, which is part of the plot.
Mm-hmm.
And they are shooed away from a castle that they're attempting to investigate, and then turned around, and Holmes is summoned back to the castle by none less than Mycroft.
Yes, and Mycroft gives us our explanation about what's up, which is that they are testing a submarine, and they've disguised that submarine with a monster, basically the Loch Ness Monster, with a big dinosaur head. Funny story about said submarine. So it's obvious in this film that some of those scenes when they're out on the loch in the boat was filmed in a studio.
Uh-huh.
But some of it was actually filmed on the loch. And
Really?
they actually did build a mechanical Loch Ness Monster, and they sunk it. And it was found about 2 or 3 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
I remember, I think it's on my Facebook wall history. But they found it, and when they found it, the people that found it, it's like, what the hell? Because it's a Loch Ness Monster. But yeah, it sunk and was on the bottom of Loch Ness for close to 50 years.
Wow. That's pretty awesome.
Which mirrors the fate of the Loch Ness Monster submarine in the film.
Well, we before that, we find out that Miss Valladon is not who she claims to be, that she's actually a German spy.
And they do drop hints.
Yeah, but those clues have been dropped since the time she appeared at 221B Baker Street at the very, early on in the film. She's been signaling throughout the film.
With her parasol.
Yep. And we find out that she's a spy and has been signaling to her counterparts, so on and so forth. So Holmes gives an artificial signal, and they are lured into the submarine, find a curiously insufficiently guarded
very easy to get,
which is already running, and all they have to do as experienced sailors is climb in and sail away in it. But it's been
it's a trap,
basically, and they are sunk.
Yeah, because the bad guys, the Germans, are posing as Trappist monks.
Yeah.
So that they can wear hoods and don't have to talk and reveal their accents.
Yeah. But Miss Valladon is taken into custody by Mycroft, which leads to the end of the film where Holmes is notified that Miss Valladon has taken her posting to Japan, which was the posting she was going to take before this posting, and has been living in Japan for some period of time under the assumed name Mrs. Ashdown.
Yes, so Mycroft lets him know that he has received reports that she was executed.
She was
by
discovered
the
and
Japanese.
summarily executed.
Yeah.
At which point, Watson willingly provides Holmes with his 5% solution.
Yeah, which is the joke.
Yeah.
That 7%, it's like, oh, it's 5%, Watson. I know you've been watering it down for
some time.
I like the use of it, and it has a very different take on it from the 7% solution, in which it's crippling Holmes in that film, whereas in this film, he has those melancholy periods where he takes it.
It's crippling him until he gets the case.
Yeah. Well, in the 7% solution.
Yeah.
He's basically going to kill him, whereas he is more in control of it in this film. Another thing.
Well, but that's just a phase through the stories. At various times in the stories, he's in varying degrees of control of his addiction.
Yeah.
So.
But it just doesn't seem as serious to me, obviously, in this version as opposed to in the 7% solution. One other thing that I kind of liked about this film, and it's heavy in early in the film and less throughout, where they talk about, and they do reference it after that, about how Watson embellishes things about Holmes. And it's like, you saddled me with this ridiculous outfit that now I have to wear the stocking cap everywhere because everybody expects it of me. You got me people thinking I'm this virtuoso violinist where I'm only okay and I'd have a hard time in a community orchestra.
That he would have trouble making it as a second-rate violinist in a community orchestra. Yeah.
And you make me look like I'm this drug fiend, whereas I'm only an occasional user. And I liked it because it was just a little different.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. They do imply at one point more seriousness to the addiction, like the first time that he goes to get his 5% solution, the shakes are if people who are familiar with addiction would recognize the shakes, and things of that nature. So yeah.
But I'm quite fond of it. It's enjoyable. I like the pacing. I like the leisurely pace of it. It's fun. I would even argue that it is the funnest of the Sherlock Holmes films that we've watched this month.
I don't think I could disagree with you, but I'm not 100% positive off the top of my head that I would fully agree with you. My primary critique of this film, or let me rephrase that, my primary criticism of this film is the same as my primary criticism of all of the films we watched this month.
Okay.
Sherlock Holmes begs to be episodic in nature.
Okay.
And it's hard to encapsulate a good Sherlock Holmes in an individual movie.
If you could choose any of the actors who played Holmes in any of the films that we saw and cast them in a more episodic, say, TV version, who would you cast? And I know right off that mine would be Robert Stevens from this film. I just think he has that, there's a casualness in his performance that it feels like you're just seeing a glimpse and that there's other adventures. And he just feels like he'd be a natural fit in an episodic rendition of Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you. The only reason that I might say anything different is that with like a Robert Downey Jr., you benefit from the technology and imagery that can be created today that couldn't have been created, back in the 1970s. That would be the only reason why I might pick someone else.
Mm. So should we talk about final thoughts and ratings on this film?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, how would you rate this film?
Oh, this film, it'd be hard to really give it more than 3 stars, but it's very solid 3 stars.
I'm sitting right around 2.5 on the 4-star scale and probably about a 7 on the 10-star scale.
Yeah, I'd give it probably about a 7 on the 10-star scale.
How do you think it fares in reviews online? I have not looked at this before asking you this question.
I am unsure.
Actually, and again, I did not look at this ahead of time. 7.1 stars on IMDb.
Indeed.
So,
and I believe critically it was pretty well received. I want to say it has around an 85% Rotten Tomatoes score.
Do you recall what this was rated? Oh, PG-13. Appropriate rating. Yeah, this would be a good, if you had, say, a younger audience who was interested in Sherlock Holmes, this would be a good and decent introduction to Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
It would easily hold them and leave them wanting more.
It held my interest.
Oh yeah,
it did a good job of holding the interest throughout.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Even when it wasn't, as we mentioned before, there's not a big clip to its pace. It's still interesting. Did we want to comment really about any of the performances?
Well, I mean, your titled performances: Robert Stevens, Colin Blakely, Genevieve Page. They got
really
great
good chemistry together.
Oh yeah,
they work really well together, and it's fun to have Christopher Lee in it.
Well, and Genevieve Page sells the double agent very well.
So Genevieve Page in this film or Vanessa Redgrave in the 7% Solution? Who do you prefer?
Genevieve Page.
Vanessa Redgrave. Close, though.
Yeah.
In fact, we should probably segue into ranking the films. These last 2 that we watched were pretty darn close for me. So in ascending order, I think the last place would have to be the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes, which I didn't enjoy at all.
I'm not surprised by that.
And then we'd do the Basil Rathbones. I preferred the second film, Terror by Night, to Sherlock Holmes and the Secret Weapon, the first of the 2 we watched. And then it is razor close between The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes and the 7% Solution. I think I enjoyed and kind of liked watching this film more, but I think the 7% Solution is smarter and I respect it more. So if I had to choose the best, it would narrowly go to the 7% Solution, based largely on Alan Arkin's Sigmund Freud. which makes that film funny.
That's true. I'd kind of let that slip a little bit in my esteem of it. I would agree. I would actually say that The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes might arguably be the best of the four.
Oh, okay.
I probably would bump the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes just ahead of the Basil Rathbone.
All right.
Though really close. It's almost more like a tie because the Basil Rathbones are good and they are more episodic in nature. It is more exactly what I was looking for out of a Sherlock Holmes. They were both entertaining. Yeah. It's been a solid month.
Where would you put the 7% solution?
Second.
Okay.
Yeah. That would be in second place. So the only question is who's third and who's fourth.
Yeah.
Or do you call third a tie, which is kind of cop out. So I try to avoid doing that. But yeah.
But there's a lot out there in Sherlock Holmes. We've considered doing it with
This
Robin
is actually
Hood.
one of the stronger months we've had in a couple months.
We've considered revisiting Robin Hood, but we've more strongly considered revisiting Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
In probably sometime next
I
year.
think we could probably do both, but I think we should spread them out and do one
Yeah.
in 2021, one in 2022.
Because I think it would be really fun to come back and revisit and just to kind of search for, maybe even see that Christopher Lee version. Just search for like obscure versions of Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
And see what they have to offer.
Well, if we come back to it, then we're going to have to throw in a couple episodes of the Benedict Cumberbatch. You know.
No,
Yeah.
hey, we might do a season.
Well, a season would take a
season's
little
like
while.
6
but-
episodes.
Yeah, but they're longer.
Oh, okay.
Longer episodes. So to do it in an evening, we'd have to try and narrow it down to 2, maybe 3. And even then, it'd be a long evening. So maybe we could do it on a weekend and do a season.
Or we could watch them separately.
Yeah.
And come back and...
Well, didn't you go to the theaters with me to catch one of the Benedict Cumberbatch
Benedict, and
Sherlock specials?
that's the only one I've seen in its entirety.
Ah. Aren't you getting access to Netflix streaming soon?
I think so. I should.
If you do, then they're all on there and you should watch them.
Well, we had a fun time with Sherlock Holmes month. These things tend to get posted out of order, but our plan for next month, being October, be a number of Halloween
Our
horror
October
films.
episodes likely will come out before the Sherlock
Yeah.
Holmes. For the most part, they come out in order. There's only a few that go real out of order, but the October in particular will be out of order this year.
Well, until we record again,
I'm Rob.
and I'm Nate.
And this has been Rob and Nate Record a Podcast.
Rutabaga. Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. American. All the ships at sea. Dateline, New York. Mayor LaGuardia is in a pickle with a showgirl. That's as far as I got.